The proportion of private renters with children who are living in damp homes in England has almost doubled since the pandemic. This is according to BBC analysis.
Now, that figure's risen from 1 in 14 households with damp problems before COVID hit to 1 in 7 from 2022 to 2023. This is according to the English Housing Survey. And it's thought 1.5 million children in England were living in homes that failed decency standards. We can get more on this now. We're joined by the housing campaigner, Kwajo, Tweneboa. Good morning, to you. Now, look, you know this. You know what it's like to live in a property which is basically unfit for living in, because you've done it.
Yes. I mean, I've experienced living in a house with damp and mould and in dish repair, and I've spoken to so many people across the country who have lived and are living in those conditions too.
And you're campaigning now, but just give us an insight into how this affected you so personally and your family.
Yeah, I mean, we had to put our lives on hold living in those sorts of conditions. I mean, my dad was very unwell in those conditions.
So were you in a flat or a house?
We were in a house, and my dad was diagnosed with cancer, and we were living with cockroaches, mice, damp, mould, missing ceilings at one point, lights that were filled with water.
And why hadn't those issues been addressed?
Well, that's the question we had at the time. We had been complaining, and we were in temporary accommodation that was in poor conditions for a very long time. So then when we got the social housing, we were so grateful. We had been making the complaints, but our landlord simply didn't listen to us and remedy those issues in the home. And then my dad became ill, he became the priority. And after he passed away, things just went from bad to even worse. And I mean, I had to turn to social media to expose those conditions before anything was done.
I think you said, Kwajo, at the beginning that you and your family's life went on hold.
Yes.
Because of the circumstances you're living in, those conditions. Is that something you're hearing from a lot of other people?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've travelled the country again speaking to people living in equally as bad conditions, sometimes even worse, and they say that it feels as though they've had to put their lives on hold. Often their kids becoming ill, or them having to take time out of work, drop out of university, and those sorts of things, because it affects their mental state so much, as well as in many cases their physical health too.
And these figures that we were just talking about a moment ago, 1.5 million children in England living in homes that don't have decent standards. Those numbers are rising dramatically. Have you tried? What explanation is there? I mean, it's not. It should not be happening, clearly. But what do you understand to be why it's getting so much worse?
Well, especially since I've started campaigning and the media have been going out there into people's homes, there's been a massive rise in people coming forward and complaining. I think these issues have existed for a very long time, but even after the death of Al Bishak, the 2-year-old boy in Rochdale, as a direct result of living in a home filled with damp and mould, more people came forward. But the issue of damp and mould has existed in people's homes for generations, and often the residents have been blamed for it. But people understand how serious living in a home now with damp and mould can be, and how detrimental it can be.
Well, strangely, that's kind of a positive in a way, that people are coming forward when they were just suffering in silence before. The question mark, of course, is what are your legal rights? If you are in a property which is below standards, damp, for example, the kind of conditions you described before, what legal rights do you have? Well,
you can turn to your local authority, and in regards to the social housing sector, we have an ombudsman, which they're hoping to extend into the private rented sector, which should be able to help. And you could also go down the legal route. Many people struggle getting legal aid, so that is a massive issue at the moment too. But ultimately, it takes enforcement of legislation. It's going to take new legislation. It's going to take Al's law, but it has to be enforced in order to help, because we're talking large numbers of people up and down the country that are living in these conditions. In the private rented sector, 1 in 4 homes does not meet the decent home standard currently.
I'm going to pick up on a word you said when you were talking about your own circumstances. We were so grateful.
Yeah.
And there is an element, surely, that people don't want to complain.
Yeah.
When they've got the housing they've been waiting for, or if it's private renting, you know, the ability now in terms of whether you can be released from your contract by your landlord. And this is obviously being discussed a lot at the moment in Parliament. How confident are people about complaining?
Not confident at all currently in the private rented sector, and similarly in the social housing sector too, especially if you're in temporary accommodation, because you then worry that for some reason you may not get the housing that you need. And in the private rented sector, Section 21 notices is a massive issue. There is a huge fear from tenants that if they complain about these conditions, that their landlords are then going to hand them a Section 21 notice and ask them to move out.
It takes a long time, though, doesn't it, to kind of get, even if you've made the complaint, to get the process done, and it's exhausting.
It is exhausting. It's mentally exhausting. It puts residents in precarious situations, and often they live with young kids. And I mean, they're worried on one hand about receiving a Section 21 notice and being evicted from their home, or their child becoming unwell because of the conditions that they're having to live in.
Can I just ask lastly, Kwajo, I mean, you're clearly, because of your experiences, well versed in all of this. Were you and your family able to get rehoused? I mean, were you able to reach the point that the people in these homes are trying to get to get it sorted?
Well, it took naming and shaming. It took going to social media and going to the news for our landlord at the time to act and do what they were responsible, or fix what they were responsible for fixing. I am in the same property, but they've had to sort it and sort the issues that we had been complaining about for a very long time, even whilst my dad was ill.
So it's kind of the glare of being outed for that.
Yeah, it shouldn't take that, though. Everyone deserves a safe, decent and stable home to live in, and that's the point I really wanted to make.
Well, you're campaigning, and I know you've written a book as well called Our Country, Our Crisis, which is available now. And thanks for coming on and highlighting the issues.
Thank you.
Tweneboa, thank you.
Thank you.